we're now going into discussion time, question and answer time. I would like to kick it off with a question. How do the speakers think that your research can enrich the teaching of basic sciences at school? There are obvious connections to basic sciences, but do you think that it could be made accessible and be useful to integrate it into teaching at school? Prof. Maladu, can we start with you?
Okay, so over the years, we've participated in masterclass activities that have included high schoolers and beyond. There's been competitions that have included high schoolers with data we have provided, and there's basically a lot of activity in teaching people to extract information from data. This is a very important activity. And that's really what we have been doing in South Africa in collaboration with the European lab CERN, where CERN has provided a lot of the infrastructure, the data, the instructors, in collaboration with our instructors. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Maybe other speakers can come in. I can remember other activities we've had in the past. Thank you.
Ntokozizi.
Oh, okay, thank you. There is a program which I was involved in when I was still working at SEON. We actually developed a manual for high school learners just to learn about the biomes of South Africa. So during that time, I was working in science engagement. So we got to interact with different learners in high schools just to try and teach them the importance of environmental science. I'll just share the link here in the chat because I just want to find it very quickly so you can have a look at what the online manual looks like. It started off as a book, but because of COVID, then we had to make an online thing. So support everyone. Then you can also speak to the people at SEON who will continue to run with that.
Prof. Mashele.
Yes, thank you very much. You are well aware also of the fact that students have been calling for the decolonization of the curriculum. And this is a very important thing. And we've actually started with that process and making sure that some of this knowledge is being incorporated in the curriculum so that students do not just look at the West for knowledge, but we also are not just the consumers of knowledge from the West, but we can also provide some knowledge as maybe coming from Africa. Because in most cases, even when we're talking about these things about plants and all that, you'll find that maybe scientists from overseas would come here and get some of these plants and do their research there, as if now this thing is their own thing and Africa is not being mentioned in this thing, but this thing actually originated here in Africa. But now they came here, they took maybe a particular plant, they go overseas, they come up with a particular drug, they market it, and Africa has forgotten about this whole thing. So we're trying to also make sure that really this is also being incorporated. And of course, now these days, there are also rules around this particular thing of IPs and all this, this kind of, to making sure that people are not just being exploited with their knowledge, but to making sure that this ultimately, we share the knowledge, and as Africa, we play a role in producing knowledge and not just being consumers. Thank you very much.
Okay, I want to ask of Bruce Maladu, is physics a basic science to chemistry? Is one more basic than the other?
Yeah, I think of physics and chemistry as basic sciences that have evolved over many, many years to develop fundamental science and research. I remember when I was studying physics, chemistry was right across, and we would basically be talking to each other. There would be lecturers and professors coming to us, and there would be lectures and professors of physics going to the other building. And I remember taking chemistry as a physics undergrad. So I don't know, I was educated in that system where fundamental sciences talk to each other. We also had professors in mathematics coming and giving lectures and all that. So yeah, I think of them as physics, chemistry, and other sciences, basic sciences that talk to each other. Here at WITS, we also have a lot of synergies between the School of Physics and the School of Chemistry through material sciences, and that collaboration has been going on for many, many, many years. In fact, I do understand that a center of excellence was actually built and put together on the basis of that collaboration. So we certainly are, yeah, we can work together when that's possible.
That is very interesting. You don't have to answer it, but I'm wondering about the implications for school teaching. Then I want to ask you, to what extent have Einstein's statements been confirmed? I mean, it was theoretically proved by him and predictions were made. To what extent have those predictions been confirmed by the research at CERN particularly?
Right. So I can speak of Einstein in general and research in general as well, not just CERN. I mean, Einstein's contribution to physics revolves around two main contributions. One is special relativity and another general relativity. So, of course, special relativity is known to be correct. And for instance, the fact that the speed of light is finite and nothing travels faster than the speed of light. So that's special relativity. And that's the basis of, I mean, of the theory of physics today. I mean, it's you know, it's an integral part of the theory of physics today. And then comes general relativity, and one of the most important predictions is gravitational waves, which have been discovered recently, and the Nobel Prize was awarded to 3 physicists just recently with the discovery of gravitational waves by the LIGO experiment. So that's a confirmation of general relativity predictions by Einstein as well, which basically took about 100 years or so to take place, because gravitational waves are basically very difficult to detect. So it has taken a lot of work to get to the precision where you can see through interference effects those gravitational waves. So yes, and certainly those have been confirmed as well.
Thank you very much.
I was fascinated by the presentation. And my question to you, I mean, you have a lot of data and there's a lot more out there. Have you guys thought about using machine learning to create predictive systems, which is obviously something that is available, readily available, with open source software that incorporate many different kinds of algorithms that can be used for processing and development of data-driven models that can be combined with existing ones?
All right, thank you for the question. It's a very good question. So with the work that we're doing currently, we're still trying to do some baseline studies just to try and understand the system, to understand the kinds of inputs that you need to put into that kind of model. So most of the models that we're doing at the moment are very basic. We're still trying to figure out what kind of data we need, at what scale, and if it's also going to make sense, because there are a lot of models that have been done with machine learning and all of that, but sometimes they don't really represent the real world. And most of the time they have a very northern hemisphere bias. Like I gave you the example of the tree planting in grasslands, because trees are a huge part of the ecosystem in the northern hemisphere. But here in Africa, we have many different kinds of landscapes which are not necessarily there in Europe and America. So that's the other issue we have with the models, is that they mostly focus on what's happening there. But we first need to test the parameters that we have here, and then we can be able to build our own models. But it is very important to have that machine learning because it helps us to process that data much faster.
Bruce, is that a new hand?
It is.
Oh, good.
And I just wanted to pile up on what has just been said. I mean, you're absolutely right. We cannot transport models from other countries to other countries. We need local data to generate models that are valid to the specifics of the ecosystem you're trying to model. So the great advantages that machine learning provides is that it's able to create models that you can incorporate on classical models based on the local data. And there's plenty of it, starting from satellite and many other data, climate data, that that needs to be analyzed and incorporated into modeling so that it's applicable to the specifics of an area or a country and whatnot. And this is where AI offers. For instance, we went through the exercise of COVID-19, and I remember in the beginning of 2020, there was a lot of debate as to how an experience of one country, say Europe or European countries, would be applicable elsewhere. And there was always this outcry, no, we need local models. And we were very clear that local models had to be based on local data to be able to make predictions. And then the whole program of, South African data being the input to modeling of COVID-19 basically came to be. And all the models we used for predictions were really based on South African data and South African data only. So anyway, let's talk offline about this.
Yes, yes.
Great. I think that's a great connection to make. Yeah, I've got a question for both you and Professor Mashele. I want to ask about diets. Ntokozisi, you spoke about how things are changing, that the length of the dry seasons is increasing, that the number of growth days vary according to the place in the world. We seem to do quite well on that. I don't know if I've understood that correctly, but it seems that our plants are growing quite well in the eastern half of the country, more or less. And then what implications does that have for the eating of meat? If you take into account also how animals are dealing with changing circumstances and the dangers of the risks to animals in climate change. And then relating that to Dr. Mashele, he's advocating for plant-based diets, and there are many health reasons for that. So I just would like both of you to comment on that, on diets, the implications of what you've spoken about for diets, human diets.
All right, I'll just speak. So when I was looking at this, I wasn't necessarily looking in terms of crops. So it's just like general growing season for plants and everything. But I guess if we're to look at crops, I'm not really a farmer, so I don't really know what kind of inputs that they need, because I think as much as the climate may be good for growth, I think there are many other things which can also affect them. Maybe also another thing which I know that with climate change is at an increased level, like the kinds of diseases that plants and animals face as well. There is a link between like the diseases that those two experience with climate change. So then that could also have an effect on that. I think, like I mentioned in the presentation, is that most of the time you study one thing and you think it's that, but then there are also other things which can also complicate the story in there. So I think that's the best answer I can give right now.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much. Prof. Mashele?
Yes, thank you very much. I think, remember when we're looking at plants, we're saying that as things actually change and all that, that's where scientists actually come in to also make these plants to be more resilient as the weather actually changes. So it's about the molecular engineering there to making the plants to be more resilient to the changing climate, so that ultimately we don't find ourselves in a situation where, because of the changing climate, that would actually then affect the fact that we're not going to have certain, maybe, plants and so forth and so forth. But most importantly, also when talking about diet and meat and so forth, remember, we're not really just saying that people should stop eating meat, but it's about maybe some people eat a lot of meat and so forth, because meat is also good, like for maybe protein purposes and so on. Some people, you can derive quite a lot of proteins from meat and so on. But to making sure that you balance your diet accordingly, you're making sure that you've got also your plant-based and also meat in your food situation, and not just maybe concentrating on maybe your dairy and your meat. But if you balance it accordingly, you can also prevent yourself from suffering from some of these conditions. As we said, some of these plants would have maybe your antioxidant and other benefits there that could actually assist you in making sure that you can deal with what you call maybe your free radicals, your oxidants and so forth in your body, and making sure that you don't develop some of these conditions that people might actually be facing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to make a comment that I see the value of communicating science from our 4 speakers today. They're all excellent communicators. I enjoyed Sam Mashele for his interesting language. There were many of them, but there was one in particular, a single golden molecular bullet. I thought that was wonderful. And Ntokozini said that he enjoys communicating science. And so that's why we have him today, is because he's able to do that. Bruce Malado, I think, is legendary in his communication of very complex concepts in a way that we can all understand. If we concentrate and he speaks slower, then it is possible to follow. And who have I left out? I'm sure I've left out a speaker there, but for all 4 of the speakers, I think it was such a treat to be able to listen to you communicating your sciences. Okay, audience, please ask some questions. Can I ask about pollution? Yes, thank you.
Yes, hi, I have a question. I wanted to find out when you talk about basic sciences, for example, when you're speaking about physical science and then how it breaks down into its different basic sciences, at what point should the education system break it down? Because you find that in matric, for example, you're doing physical science, which is covering chemistry and physics, but then when you get to varsity, that's when it's broken down. So would it not be better to start it more basic before varsity? That's my question.
Yes, would you like to answer that, Bruce Malado?
Okay, I have to say I'm not an expert in the whole ecosystem of the created by the DHET, but as as a university academic, obviously in order to be able to connect basic education with higher education, there has to be continuity. There has to be a consistency, and of course we are always complaining about the mathematics education in basic education, and some of the training that the students get with when they get to Wits University. And indeed, I do agree fully. I mean, the connection between fundamental sciences, how they are taught, and how mathematics plays a role in bringing them together is something that basic education has to pay a lot of attention to. But again, I'm not an expert. I think the DHET has a lot of people in their department that really do a lot of thinking about this. And of course, there's a lot of challenges as well.
Good afternoon. I wanted to know from Prof. Mashele, what exactly is like the difference between botany and agronomy when it comes to basic sciences? Would botany then be the basic science of agronomy?
I would actually say, you know, botany would actually be the basic science there. But I think maybe in the discussion that we are in at the moment, where we are trying to find out which one maybe is basic and so forth, and looking as to where the world is going, you'll see that in most cases now, people are talking about the multidisciplinary, where maybe, let's say, your scientist, your basic science will have to work maybe with your medical doctors or other people, so that ultimately you can be able to solve a particular problem, or working with engineers and so forth. So all these kind of disciplines will have actually to come together, so that ultimately we are going to have a greater impact in what we do. But as we rightfully say, it starts with your basic science, the foundation. But if you sometimes maybe just do the basic foundation, we know that in some cases in the sciences, you can continue in the sciences, do some research, and not maybe at that point know the application of that. But later in life, maybe other people would use the science, the knowledge that you've come up with in your research, to maybe then apply it somewhere. But obviously, another thing where people are moving to, like even now in journals and so forth, they would like to also see the impact where we've got different disciplines working together to ultimately then come with or to solve a particular problem with the knowledge from your basic science, from that maybe your engineering and so forth. And ultimately, there's going to be a huge impact in society going forward when all the disciplines actually work together. So my understanding with these things is that in most cases, like for instance, if you're looking where I also come from, I also had an opportunity to lecture students overseas. At one point, I was lecturing them biochemistry, medical biochemistry, and so forth. But you find that you're talking to some of these medical doctors, and from there, where they come from, at that point, they don't see the value of that basic science in what they actually want to do. So you've got to make it such that they see the application of that in their particular field. And that makes that interesting to them, because now they start to see the application of that. Because in some cases, when you start, they don't see really the application of that. For them, they're thinking it's not relevant to me, because they don't see that later that particular basic science is basically a building block to something for them to understand some other things a little bit later. And therefore, even today, people now are talking about problem-based learning, where you've got all these kind of disciplines actually coming together, so that ultimately there's a problem that is being solved, so that a student can see the value of your basic science because it solves a particular problem, or it helps him or her to understand a particular concept at the end of the day, you know.
Gordon Branston says, a very important research topic in the context of high impact opportunities to address basic sanitation needs of communities. The following research paper provides a synergy nexus link, role of wastewater treatment in achieving the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And there he's got the link. Wastewater treatment contributes effectively in achieving 11 out of 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Hi, Yancy. May I have perhaps some contribution to make in terms of wastewater?
Yes, of course.
So, yeah, just to make the point, I think I'm currently living in Scotland, South African living abroad, and I take the point in terms of the decolonization process. My world is vastly different in the context of opening up a tap, and I am practically guaranteed clean water. And if I don't get clean water, I pick up my phone and I contact my MSP, and within a few hours I get a response as to what's happening. So I mean, it's not something that I take for granted. Having lived in South Africa for over 40 years prior, I understand that these issues are very significant. So in the chat line, I put the point to Dr. Ziki, and it was essentially, I'm interested to hear more of the importance of the nexus connections with the basic sciences, wastewater, and the SDGs. And more specifically, as using them as a strategic lever for transformational change in both education and policy, which is why I'm actually here today, because essentially it is a critical issue. I know it to be a critical issue. I was educated in South Africa. I completed my degree at Rhodes University in environmental biotechnology, and is specifically focused on wastewater treatment. And so when I hear, especially along the coastal environments, with the transformational changes going the wrong way, I obviously raise these issues as a concern. So my question was really about, could we perhaps open the debate and clarify as to how best do we use the SDGs as strategic levers to highlight and the connectivity, the nexus approach, and could that not be done, even if it's through labeling, a presentation or a research paper actually could highlight the various goals that are connected. And in so doing, it provides a snapshot of a far deeper issue, but at least it makes that connection. And I've put this to all the presenters, because ultimately the SDGs are a significant step forward, and seemingly we have a lot to do in a very short period of time. And raising the profile in many ways, creative ways, I think does present with an opportunity. And I think researchers are in a prime position to actually take this forward. So I'll just leave it there and open it up. Thanks very much.
Department of Monitoring and Evaluation under the presidency does measurement of the SDGs and reports back to the United Nations on those, on where we stand in South Africa. Now, we haven't invited them as a speaker for a long time, but it would be very interesting to hear what the situation is at the moment. My feeling is that we've gone backwards, and that we're further from reaching the Sustainable Development Goals. But that is a very interesting idea, that they should be used as levers to urge government departments to effect change. It's one of the SDGs, of course, is the supply of potable water and the and sanitation, efficient and safe sanitation being available to the population. And I think it's expressed in terms of percentages, the percentages of the population that have access to it.